Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I serve a church in the Pacific Northwest, and I've written lots of stuff, and I'm a senior editor for Touchstone magazine. Okay, Glenn, how about you?
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I am a professor emeritus of European history at Central Connecticut State University, senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, and I have my own 501c3 ministry, East Branch Ministries, at eastbranch.org. I'm also on Patreon and Substack.
All right, man, you're loaded. Okay, Tom.
I got to catch up with you guys.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself. But before you do, let me just note that both Glenn and I are going to be at the Touchstone Conference next week. And I think this show will be coming up before then. But if not, if we've seen you at Touchstone, it was great to see you. Anyway.
Wish I could be there.
All right, Tom.
I'm Tom Price. I teach theology and Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. I do some ministry work as well. And I spend a lot of time thinking, reading, writing, and the like. So this is one of the things I've been thinking about. I guess it's my topic for the day. But let me contextualize it a little bit. It's been a rough week or past 2 weeks for those, that are in our country in particular, but I think even globally. We had an assassination of a young man who, was politically outspoken, but also very outspoken about his faith. But I think one of the things for those of us who tend to observe and think about the cultural mood and the way in which Christian faith expresses itself in that context, it was troubling to see kind of the forms and underground mutations that some of the ideologies we had hoped had kind of been dismantled in other ways are starting to take form and reactivate. And I think most troubling for me for the topic of today is especially in relationship to what I would say healthcare and medicine. And I think it was instigated by seeing enough kind of floating clips of medical practitioners, even medical doctors, joyfully celebrating the murder and death of Charlie Kirk, and with good conscience, seeing this to be very consistent with their care for people's health.
Right.
And so for me, it got me thinking a lot about really the radical modes in which healthcare, ethics, and philosophy are really becoming radicalized in rapid ways, and ways that are so troubling that if you begin thinking about the outcome of this, if it continues, we're in extremely scary territory in terms of the ability to have good faith confidence in those that care for us, look after us, especially as we age. And if we don't fit the ideological grid now, whether or not we can trust what is being offered us. There have already been suspicions due to the kind of large scale input, for example, of health insurance and insurance industries and the way in which they impact medical decisions. I've talked about before, I know firsthand from someone who is a surgeon, the pressure that medical doctors are under to have surgeries rather than other alternatives. So there is a lot of pressure already from a lot of different economic interests to compromise what is a true care for the health and well-being of someone to benefit maybe in some kind of economic way or some other way. But now we're entering territory that I think is even a lot darker than that. And I think this is probably just a good place to begin reflecting on what's going on. How serious is this? How serious should we take it? And then what's going to happen if something doesn't change the course it's starting to head? And then what can we do about it? I mean, these are kind of, I think, very lively actions. But But I guess before getting into those, it is worth saying that this has been happening for a long time. We all have mentioned on the show, of course, the way in which the technological culture itself has already moved away from something's healthy nature towards almost seeing our natures, our bodies, for example, on the same level as things we make, artifices, so that medicine, which used to be about the health of the body and what is good for it, we don't now mind injuring a healthy body if it means maybe helping someone psychologically fit in with their incongruity with that body, or even sociologically, that they may feel like they fit in better in society if they have had certain kinds of surgeries and alterations, right? Whether it's, kind of a kind of gender role they want to take on or something else. So those are radical shifts itself. But here we're talking about a shift to the move away from medical care for not doing injury to a body to possibly doing injury to someone in the name of what they consider to be a higher good, their social philosophy. And I think this is a good place to pause and let you guys kind of jump in with what's coming.
Yeah, I think I was startled a few years back when someone made an argument that advanced the idea that health, our understanding of health itself, is oppressive. In other words, that if we have an ideal that we call health, that to impose that on other people, is a problem. Let me give you an example. So let's say a person, I just saw this the other day, and this guy is actually a medical professional who had a fetish for amputations. And so what he did is he put his feet into I think a cold bath of some kind. I think it just extremely cold, so that it was frostbite, and then there was such damage that the lower parts of his legs had to be amputated. So this is a guy who did this for no other reason than he thought it was a kind of a cool thing not to have functioning legs. And the implication is that, okay, getting back to your point, because we're so used to going to the transgender phenomenon to think about this. It's not at all constrained to that or limited to that.
No,
this kind
they
of
call
thing.
that transable.
Yeah, that's just so. Yeah. It's just so nuts.
But you don't even have to go that far. You have people who are arguing that our idea that obesity is unhealthy is fat shaming, and we should even though all of the information is that obesity is really bad for you, they argue that that's a social construct.
Right.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. That shift from what used to be the focus on not to do harm to a well functioning and not functioning according to nature body, to one that is a move to the health that is sociologically defined and psychologically internalized, right? Well, and so it is this radical place at which psychological health, and of course the relation of the psychology to social pressure become the kind of dominating idea in medicine.
Well, I would actually push it back to abortion. Yeah. Abortion is the only medical procedure which, if it fails, you have somebody alive.
Right, yeah. Right.
Well, it was the first. The other one is euthanasia.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Both of which are here, both of which are complete violations of the ancient Hippocratic oath that you do no harm, you do not administer drugs to cause an abortion or to cause death.
Right.
Yeah. And the ever increasing fashion of infanticide and the increased, outside of womb X amount of time.
Sure.
And and these are all on the increase, but it's very similar, the arguments for it, that are being made. But that for the first time that I saw in a term of kind of bloodlust celebration, was kind of what I saw recently, where people, medical doctors, were celebrating and saying these people got what was coming to them. And how do you go to a person in good faith, knowing that if you somehow trigger their interpretive engine, and you somehow fit into the one who is quote unquote an oppressor rather than the oppressed, then all of a sudden you need to be ignored if your blood pressure is up, or tell them that read the charts wrong. And again, I'm not saying there aren't some checks and balances right now, but what I'm saying is this is increasingly infiltrated the field of medicine. There's a book coming out at the end of this month by a medical doctor who's been sounding the alarm on the way in which the radical ideology that hit almost every other field is now starting to become regular in medical practice.
Yeah, this reminds me of the incredulity of people that I would talk to about these developments in the humanities, who were in, say, the sciences, biosciences as well as other, and they would note that it could never happen here because we have some objective basis for our evaluating our work. And I just laughed. They were the ones who were naive. I think this brings back a couple of things to mind. It brings a couple of things. But remember when Reagan was shot back in the mid '80s? Do you remember what he asked the doctors when they were about to put him under? He said, "I hope you're all Republicans," and they just laughed. And and then they did their work, put them under, and that kind of thing. That was a joke in those days. Now you're like, wait a minute, maybe that's not a joke anymore. And then you think about, say, doctors who were very sensitive or sort of committed to their duty, as because when it came to the oath that they had taken, of not playing favorites, during wartime, attending to the needs of the enemy, who was injured on the field of battle, they would do it. And so, we're just in a really bad spot.
Let me tell you a story. Story time with Glenn. There was a physician in 7th century, I think it was, named Hunayn ibn Ishaq. He was a Christian, and he had studied medicine in Greece, brought that back with him, and he became the private physician of the caliph. He was very, very high up in the government. He was mostly paid, by the way, to translate Greek medical texts into Arabic, which he did with his son. He's also responsible for a lot of Aristotle coming over there. So keep in mind that the so-called Golden Age of Islam, where they have all of these things, that happened because of Christian translators. But in any event, at one point, the caliph came to him and said, "All right, I need you to compound a poison so that I can kill some of my enemies." And he refused. The caliph put him in prison, it says for a year, took him out and told him he would be beheaded if he didn't do what the caliph asked, and he refused to do it. The caliph then relented. He said, "Well, it was really just a test. I wasn't serious."
After all that.
But he was asked why he didn't do it. And he said, "Well, there are two reasons. One of them is, my training is to help, not hurt. And I would be violating my role as a physician if I did that." And actually, he claimed not to have knowledge of poison, which I didn't believe. But the second thing he said is because Jesus told him he was supposed to love his enemies, how much more his friends. So he couldn't do it. And he was willing to get beheaded for that.
Right.
To spend a year in prison and all of those sorts of things. I wonder how many doctors today would, even Christians, would have the integrity to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially in light of the things that we're seeing with the aftermath of Kirk's assassination.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I guess it really does go. I mean, one is, and you've talked about it before, but maybe it's a good thing to remind people of, is the world of healthcare and caring for people was very different prior to Christianity's impact on the world.
Right.
And everything that we do know, that, I mean, not everything, but for large scale, the things we do know as, healthcare and caring for everyone, or trying to. I know there have been injustices and there have been people
Sure.
left out of the picture. I'm not trying to talk about a perfect health system. I'm talking about the aims of trying to not make these kinds of judgments of who gets and who doesn't, and pushing to make that available to as many as possible as we can. But that is very much a Christian contribution to culture. And I'm not saying that there haven't been times where medicine has been more broad than the local tribe or community, but what you really see is its universalization, and then the developments of hospitals and cares, and in the interplay between clergy care for souls and health, salvation and health. And then, of course, stories that are fundamental to the teachings of Jesus, the story of the Good Samaritan, for instance, and the way in which this plays on the imagination of relationships to people that are, considered unclean, and yet still worth wrapping the wounds up and taking care of their health. And like you said, in wartime, even the enemy, right? At least caring for their health well-being enough to preserve a life if you can. Again, I'm sure that's a big zone of temptation
Sure.
to allow it to be neglected in situations like that. Enemy love is a hard thing anyway.
Sure.
But it is a command of Christ, and I think to be fair to any kind of system that is going to apply health,
Right.
I think it's one of those principles we shouldn't
Right.
weaken with.
So when we think about the name hospital, if I remember correctly, the Hospitallers are, in the history of healthcare, Hospitallers being I think a military order, isn't that right, Glenn?
Well, it's a more generic term, but there was a military order called the Hospitallers. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, just as, we can say healthcare, broadly speaking, is present in every culture, but in terms of the institutionalization of it in a kind of vigorous way, I think as we know it today, I think we can credit Christianity for that.
Yeah. Christianity, actually, the first hospital worthy of the name was the Basiliad from St. Basil the Great. Prior to that, you had things like the Temple of Asclepius in Greece, which was something like a hospital, except only the very wealthy could go there.
Right.
What Basil did is he set up a place that would feed the poor, would provide medical education for people, would take care of the sick, would do all of those things, and would do it purely out of Christian charity, not to the poor as well as the rich.
Right. So this, principle of universalized healthcare, we use that politically today to talk about some kind of a program, but in spirit, it's already there. I mean, even in a country like the United States, where we don't have a system that we call socialized medicine, I don't think I've ever heard of a person being turned away from a hospital. Maybe there's stories out there that people could share that could be corrected, but that's one of those canards people like to present as sort of an argument for a different way of doing things than we currently have kind of on the ground now in the United States. But getting back to the main point, this is where, I think that there is this idea that has been used to justify secularism, that religion is uniquely, sort of guilty of making kind of a set of boundaries that keep out certain people from, sort of a sphere of influence and care. And what we've learned over the last, say, maybe 200 years is that you don't need religion for that at all. Political ideologies are just as good, if not more powerful.
Yeah. And I think the reason why you see that is because their use of religion is a product of the modern nation state. It's the product of 16th and 17th century, where you start to define religion in terms of a set of beliefs and practices that mark off a group. Classically, religion is kind of similar. It's a virtue. It's similar to like justice is giving a person their due. Religion is giving God his due. And the way in which the term God functions in classic religion is it's the way a word like treasure functions, right? If you say I'm going to the grocery store and I want to get 4 pieces of fruit, 4 loaves of bread, and 4 treasures. Okay, well, you're like, what do you mean treasure, right? No, treasures are things you treasure, right? Gods are things that you value utmostly, you devote yourself to, and no one can not have a God because their hearts have an ultimate concern. In this case, it's ideologically defined rather than classically in terms of a theological way of understanding it, but it is just as marked by religiosity and ultimate commitment as anything else. This is why ideologies can tend to be more dangerous because they don't have a process that weans you from idolatry. And what they end up doing is creating something more dangerous, which is something that doesn't have the capacity to handle a proper faith and commitment. And that is they create a creature idea instead of the creator, and that does the damage. They project something in its place. So secularism is just a radicalized idolatry, and it is as religious through and through as anything.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the term, religion, is it's used in the pejorative so often. But I think what I'd like to see us do more is think about sort of idolatry and ideology. I mean, the words do have a common root.
Yeah.
And so I think, do they have a common root? I'm wondering about that. I'm second guessing myself right now. They might. They might not. They might not.
I don't think so. But
they sound alike.
That's right. Yeah. Well, they easily lend themselves to each other. Yeah, because what you have is a concept which is. I mean, you have a concept that is trying to replace that which cannot be contained within a concept. And so therefore it does all the kinds of damage. That's why when, like, say Descartes has a clear and distinct idea of God, you don't want anything to do with that.
That's right. Right. Yeah. So, but what we're dealing with then is something that doesn't have within itself, when we think about an ideology, the kind of the corrective kind of character that Christianity does. So, for example, Christianity has built right into it these strong prohibitions on vengeance, for example.
Yeah.
Just this past Sunday, I quoted Romans 12:19, where Paul says, "Don't seek vengeance. Vengeance is mine. I'll repay. Save it for the day of wrath." That's the Lord will take care of it someday, and it's not in your time, but in His own time. His own way, and you should be praying for your enemies in the meantime, that they'll repent, that they'll come to trust Christ as the one who satisfies God's wrath and justice, and trust in Him. So there's nothing like that in communism. There's nothing like that even in libertarianism.
Yeah. Well, this is. Go ahead.
Yeah, and what worries me, this is really a separate topic, but what worries me is the degree to which I'm running into some young men who are saying, "Yeah, we tried talking. They shot him." They're really ready practically to go to literal war at this point, and that worries me tremendously.
Yeah. So, I mean, 2 different, I guess, ways to kind of respond to that. I mean, on the one side, back to Chris's point, is that Christianity, classically, if you want to understand religion the right way, it is to understand Christian religion as a school of pedagogy. We call it disciple, being students. And what is at the heart of that What is the heart of true theology? It's not that you're going to somehow get a correct conceptual understanding of God, because we're not capable of that. What it does is it orients us to the right God by weaning away all those things that are distortions of God, right? This is why the prohibition, right? You have no other gods before me. Nothing creaturely can represent. God's going to do the defining and the revealing. But in that, what do? That knowledge is one that exposes where our hearts truly sit, helps clean our love so that we are no longer committed to creaturely things in idolatrous ways. And so we can look at our neighbor in a loving way. Why? Because we begin to see them in the light of that God that isn't an idol. They don't have this kind of corrective. What they have is they have a clear and certain idea of what is of utmost importance, and they can see very clearly from their conceptual world who fits in and who doesn't, and they don't have a check and balance on their concept. And as soon as you disagree with it, you're guilty of already not seeing the point and therefore an enemy. And so it's a very different approach. They have no protocols and ways of educating themselves out of idolatrous conceptions. They would claim they're just being rational, but as we know, ideas, however rational they are, can be destructive and dangerous. And the flip side is the other extreme, right? What happens now that communication has broken down and you have very few options? If you can't avoid each other, what do you do? Is it going to come down to survival of the fittest? I think that's the thing people are worried about if it isn't uprooted, which is not an easy task. And like you said, at this point, you can't catechize a bunch of people that are indoctrinated in this way through our normal means of education. And it is more widespread, I think, than a lot of people have been willing to see. It is all the way up in hospitals, nursing rooms, every educational institution.
Rutgers did a survey in which people who self-identified as left-leaning, 48% of them said that assassinating Elon Musk might be justified.
Yeah.
55% said the same of Trump.
Yeah.
So that's of all of the left-leaning people that they surveyed.
Right.
This is scary stuff.
So getting back to your point earlier about talking and so forth, I agree with you, Glenn, that we're not we don't want vigilantism. At the same time, I think a lot of those people are kind of reacting to a kind of a false sort of like kind of moderate kind of concept of how the world works. Moderating. So basically, this is the middle way argument. The idea that I'm not left, I'm not right, I'm in the middle, or I'm too liberal for the conservatives, I'm too conservative for the liberals. I'm kind of in the middle. This is the gospel coalition kind of mode. And what ends up happening so often with something like that is that there's a sympathetic sort of an almost apologetic handling of one side and a dismissive and kind of uncaring dismissal of the other. And we kind of know how this works. So, a guy like Tim Keller was very respectful when he listened to, say, Marxist, but wasn't so interested in hearing anybody who was maybe further to the right than he was, which was, a lot of us. So I think some of those guys are really more kind of fed up with that. Yeah. And I think we need to be perfectly frank about the fact that, getting to your point, Tom, the left has kind of run the show for a long time. Yeah. And there's been a lot of people who have served their interests by playing interference for them. Yeah. And some of those people are in my denomination, the PCA.
Yeah,
and and in the SBC, and so I think people are just kind of fed up with them. Now, does that mean that we should all just kind of organize in the town square and grab our guns and that kind of? No, of course not. But I do think we need more just forthright truth telling and saying to people, for example, in my denomination, the PCA, we have a seminary, a covenant seminary, and it's been noted that when George Floyd was shot, it had a lot to say. When Charlie Kirk was shot, or I should say, when George Floyd was died or killed, when Charlie Kirk was killed, not a peep. And this is the kind of thing we see again and again and again.
Well, and usually what you get there is you will often hear people, maybe rightly so in some cases, say to someone on the right, you know what, you're kind of making a idol out of a certain kind of nationalism or something. But the flip side is they never do it the other way around. They never say, wait a minute, you've turned an ideology that claims to be, say, fighting, say, racism into nothing more than a way of basically ending up and constructing an idol that is destructive as any other kind of ideology. And this is the thing, I think, getting a hold of our catechetical tradition, not simply in what we do at Sunday school, but in the way in which we educate and inform even people outside of the church. That's what classic apologetics is, right? It's the way in which you're defending what you actually believe rather than what people say you believe, right? And so part of that, though, is also the flip side, going on the offensive and exposing the idols that are substitutes for the true and living God and the vision for humanity that actually allows for flourishing versus destruction. We have it. It's hard work, but it can be done. And again, this isn't about simply rationally being able to convince. It's about witness. And this is a very different thing. Bearing witness to the truth is very different than thinking we're just going to persuade someone. If we do, great. But still, we have a responsibility as Christians. And I think this is, if you want to see a world that went from the brutal pagan world to one that has hospitals, right? It wasn't because Christians sat on their creed. They went out and taught it, lived it, fought for it, defended it, and showed how it had to do with everything of life, and that the alternatives were enslaving and destructive. And they didn't get weak about it. They were bold.
Well, and there's everything you said I agree with, Tom, but there is a feature that I want to kind of stick to here, and that there is a class element in this, a social class element. The reason why the Gospel Coalition and Covenant Seminary and many people like David French and Russell Moore have genuflected to the left and been dismissive to the right is that. There is that those institutions that they wish to be respected by are controlled by the left.
Yeah, and again, there's a bowing to an idol, an institutional, cultural, elite idol, as though that somehow is worth conforming to, in a way that allows you to compromise. What do? They compromise. They're the ones doing the conforming, it's very different. But you can through the compellingness of Christ. Let's just use a scriptural text. Christ be lifted up. He has the capacity to draw all men to himself. Right. Well, what is it about that? The message itself doesn't seem like it will compel. It's a man being killed by an unjust system, legal system. Right. On a cross. And what does it do? Well, it does have the power and capacity to turn things upside down, right? But the thing is, I think there's a loss of confidence in that. So therefore, we think we've got to be respectable before the world by cowing to its set of acceptable terminology and dispositions and political positions and everything else, just so we can be on the inner boardroom at, Christianity Today or something. And but what are the losses? What is the loss in terms of salt and light? And then you have other groups that haven't lost their commitment and and yeah, they may not be as influential, but look at Touchstone. Look at, in many cases, they don't hide from their creedal orthodoxy when they go
but I can tell you that all those guys have been canceled.
Yeah.
Every one of those people on that senior editor staff have been canceled.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they experience the kind of the costs of their convictions that you don't see in other places.
Yeah, it's, and I think we've all felt it too. I mean, I definitely have in the university system and even in the seminary system. You don't fit the grid of who they need to be there, whatever your credentials and capacity. You're not the one in the interview room. You're not the one getting the book deal. I mean, you're the one who is.
But let's take this back to healthcare. So I think that a lot of what's going on is kind of a parallel phenomenon in the world of healthcare. Yeah. So there is a kind of pecking order, right? There are certain fashionable causes, fashionable convictions, fashionable things to support, fashionable people to promote, vote for, whatever. And my guess is that a physician who shows up to work one day in a MAGA hat is going to face a lot of costs that, say, people who favor the other side of the political aisle don't.
Yeah. You can just look at the battles that are taking place over the CDC and things like that right now in Washington, where each side is saying that the other side is politicizing the thing, and each side is claiming the other side doesn't have science to back it up, and so on. And it's obvious that medicine has become politicized.
Yeah,
I know which side of that particular argument I'm on, but we won't go there. But the politicization runs all the way to the highest levels of medicine.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the ideological move was meant to do. It's meant to show that this is all socially constructed. The notion of health is socially constructed, and so it becomes then a competition of whose vision is going to win out in the will competition. I mean, that's really what it's after. I mean, they're incommensurable viewpoints. You can't have someone be committed to the classic vision of medicine in the West and to a woke interpretation of it. You can't have.
Right. And this carries over into transhumanism too, of course.
Yeah.
Because with all of these things, the body is just a kind of possession. It's not really you, and it's something that you can tinker with and modify as you please. And the only standard is the desires of the person who is in the body.
Yeah.
And that's about as far as it goes. So I'm dealing with this. I'm doing a book review for Gradson Quay's book, The Transhumanist Temptation, doing it for Modern Age. And basically, the thing that has to be owned up to is that liberalism, even classical liberalism, can't get us out of this mess because it doesn't have a telos. Its only basis for kind of political order is rights, but there's no sense of purpose. What do these rights serve?
Yeah. Yeah, there is, and then the thing that really makes it difficult is, let's say that we do have the capacity to show a compelling vision where teleology is at its heart. It's also then at this point the deaf ears that anyone who doesn't quote unquote want to buy into it and is not open to being compelled rationally by a vision that could use reason to do it. So I mean, we're at that, once reason becomes, as Luther said, the devil's mistress, right? Okay, it depends on who's on the horse, whose will is on the horse. It doesn't connect to reality and being in any way whatsoever. we're at a contestation. We're at voluntarism run mad. We're after now which party can will it out through power. And again, I'm not at a full loss there. I think our intellectual appetites as humans will still need reason to be fulfilled in these visions when we see the deadly destruction that can happen if we go down certain paths that are our natures that have a desire to survive and continue and flourish. We'll fight against them. I think God beautifully put that in the fabric of things, but we can do a lot of harm in the meantime. And I think this is one of those sobering points, that it isn't just going to come from top-down power, uprooting it. But I think one of the things we have to be on, I think for the love of our own children, much less the future of humanity, is we have to be sober, especially in terms of educating, and especially in the arena of educating in healthcare. The way in which we can start to come up with these teleological alternatives. I mean, people are onto it, but it's slow to be heard. At least, like you say, at least there still is a commitment. I mean, I go just to I have a local dentist here. They're from India, and their care for the patient is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Everyone checks, careful in the surgeries, all these things you want when you go and trust someone. So I think these things are still there for people who love to serve and help people. It's not something you need to be suspicious of with all of your medical practitioners, but it is troubling to start hearing it come from those corners.
Yeah, we might find ourselves in a few years saying, "I will only go to the Catholic hospital." Yeah. I can imagine finding myself in that place.
Yeah.
Particularly if they suspect I'm a Trump voter. The secular.
I've thought quite a bit about this. This whole thing. The two places that I do not want people who are celebrating Kirk's death are in healthcare and in education.
Right.
The rest of them I can sort of let slide, but those two, no.
Right. Yeah. For a person who's like at the grocery counter at the grocery store, or who's just kind of working in sales or something like that. Yeah. But when, those are two things, that we are relying on for the health of our persons, but also the health of our society. And we can't have people with those sentiments or that lack of self-control. That's the other thing about it. I was like, okay, there are all kinds of things that happen in the course of, a year that I'm excited about or not. But I don't like every single time that something happens bad to somebody I don't like, get on social media and take a picture of myself or record myself laughing about it. I mean, what is it with people that they wouldn't get that, this might not be in my best interest, just for no other reason to do this?
It's a curious thing, and it's. I mean, I understand kind of the psychological elements, but I'm someone who thinks it's a spiritual issue fundamentally, and you see it as something that just it's taken root. And we've been talking a lot about this, the way in which ideas it's easy to think of ideas as kind of neutral things that don't have much punch unless we kind of get too excited about them and cling on to them too much. That's we actualize them. But I think the way Scripture tells you to take every thought captive to Christ should be a warning sign that by letting ideas into you and to your soul receiving these things, you're opening yourself up to fields of influence that you don't have the kind of the natural controls over with your reason that, say, someone who just was trying to kind of manage their regular baser appetites.
Just think about what the Lord said about seeds and leaven. Both those are those are the things that the Lord associates with ideas.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, though, that we need to think about here, it goes beyond the area of ideas and just the habit so many people have made of curating their life on social media.
Yeah.
Everything that people taking pictures of what they're having for dinner.
Right.
All kinds of things, everything about my life, or at least the things that I want people to know about my life, needs to be exposed to the entire world.
Right.
And the emotional reactions and things like that are a major part of this in terms of what people do on social media. And it's crazy because
some of these people have grown up with this all their life. So this is such an extension of themselves that they feel like somehow, everything's going to be received and isn't going to really have a consequence. They live in one sense in a bubble, yet they're creating all constant spectacle in which they're famous through whatever they have to say to whoever is listening. And
they don't understand. They should know by now that employers look at your social media profiles. When they're going to hire you, that's one of the first things that they do these days is they check. And there have been, I don't know how many stories I've run into of people who've gotten in trouble for that. And yet somehow they keep doing it.
Right. Yeah. Something about the visual, this isn't perhaps a subject for another show, but something about the visual media seems to validate in ways that other kinds of media don't. So, for example, I've written fiction, and sometimes people will ask me, do you hope it'll be turned into a movie someday? In other words, if it's really good, it'll be validated with a film, as opposed to it's just a book now. It's just a novel now.
Yeah. So Tolkien really arrived when Peter Jackson.
That's right. A lot of folks believe that. Yeah, it's crazy, but that's what a lot of people think. Getting back to this idea, though, that we should be able to be bigger than, say, maybe our a political moment, or maybe the team that we identify with, and then even the nation that we identify with. That there should be enough virtue and self-control present in a person to correct sort of the impulses that might lead to the things that we were talking about. So, if you feel like there's some glee in the harm that some other person has experienced, well, that's not very noble. That's not a very noble sentiment. I mean, that's something you should work at correcting, not defending.
Yeah.
But loving the right things and therefore hating the right things makes you virtuous.
Well, that's the thing, is that you have a radically redefined Manichaean type world that is. I mean, it's troubling. You have the elect and the reprobate in a new system. And the elect are the ones that are on the side of, social justice defined the way they define it. And the ones that have any other are clearly enemies worth being killed. And I think that it's the escalation of this is the bloodlust part is, I think, that we've always said it was under the surface. It has really come to the surface with this kind of, almost like, this is kind of like the old primitive tribal type actions that happen.
Right.
And so this is what we're saying, the return of a lot of these things now that the Christian buffer is no longer there holding them in check. You're about to be introduced to some very troubling things. I mean, it was bad enough to get what we had in the name of the Enlightenment, some of the most destructive political ideologies that have ever wreaked havoc on humanity in the name of humanity's good. And if we haven't learned from that huge episode, then we're in a very bad place.
Yeah, well, here we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Rod Dreher keeps citing a professor at the War College in London who's a specialist on civil war. And he says it's not, at this point, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, because every single criteria that civil war specialists have identified is present in Western cultures.
Yeah, I certainly agree with kind of the observation that the conditions that we have today are similar to those that prompted civil war in the past. I think the thing that makes me a little bit hesitant to be alarmed is the fact that the state is still, its institutions are still controlled from a central authority. So, there's a lot of infighting in Washington, but one party or the other is actually in charge at a given point. Whereas what you would need if for a civil war, now you could have a great deal of social unrest. Don't get me wrong. You could have gangs of people going out and harming other people. But when it comes to, say, what we saw with the American Civil War, I think we're a long way from that.
Yeah, and that's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about armies fighting each other. He's talking about something like what happened in Yugoslavia.
Yeah. Or as you see, what you develop is small yet connected factions of terror cells that wreak havoc. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of the mode of carrying out that kind of what they considered a holy war. And so somebody who's as simple as a minister out, sharing their faith or pushing back on some of the idols of our age is now a symbolic target that would be celebrated if they could just take that person out, because that person would be someone who, symbolically looked like a win, for that.
And that's exactly what happened with Charlie Kirk. You just outlined what happened there. Now, I don't believe in historical inevitability except under God's sovereignty. So I'm not saying that we're guaranteed a civil war. But this guy looks
the conditions are favorable. Yeah,
I think he's looking particularly at Britain, but a lot of the same things apply, in other European countries and over here.
Yeah, so I'm very, I guess, open to that argument. And if we're talking about sort of guerrilla kind of activity, which brings to mind something I know. I have ancestors who are guerrilla fighters, and I've been exploring kind of their lives and their exploits here recently in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas during the Civil War, and the stuff that they were engaged in was pretty brutal. I mean, it's so even that not that long ago, so that the fighting that was going on between the Jayhawks and the Bushwhackers in Kansas and Missouri had a pretty significant scale, but it wasn't sort of formal in the sense that we think of, say, the Northern and Southern armies of the Civil War. They were irregulars. They were irregular, and I could certainly see that for sure.
Well, and I think the thing is that, I mean, if people think that the people that have been in a large generation now that has been radicalized through our institutions, that radicalization has been deprogrammed simply because you have someone else in power, I think that idea, whatever else, I think should be clearly exposed as a falsehood. And I think connected to that is, if you think fields that used to be safe, like healthcare and medicine, or you thought were safe, there have been a lot of shifts already. Secularism wreaked enough havoc, like Glenn had mentioned, the question of abortion, which Christians from the start were the ones in particular that were against this from the start. You can go back to the Didache, and most of the earliest writings you see as they quote the Ten Commandments, along with it, they'll say this has to do also with the fetus in the womb, and also with infants up to X amount of time, because those were easily dispensable in so many of the cultures in which Christianity took root. So you saw Christians at a time where they didn't have the political influence, they didn't have the social influence, but as societies within society, they lived out a radical alternative. And I think that's step one, where we can be for life and not be for hate. And
I think too, what we need to stress is the importance of doing your duty and not doing what you feel like. So one of the things that I think has been a problem in evangelicalism for the last 150 years is the influence of Romanticism. And I understand that Romanticism has its redeeming qualities, but it's not a coincidence that the revivalist movement developed in the wake of the Romantic movement.
Yeah.
And what I deal with all the time is people who actually do believe that it's not legitimate for God's word or God's law to restrain something that kind of bubbles up naturally, or at least they think does. Whether we're talking about sexual drives, or we're talking about political passions, anything that's sort of strongly felt has to, in some sense, it must be accommodated.
Well, that's right.
Descartes' clear and distinct ideas.
Yeah, well, that's it, and this is coupled with the fact we see this today too. Also, you see it in a lot, especially the issues of sexual proclivities. The fact that certain desires are there and the desires for those things, but desire requires interpretation. Just because it is interpreted by a self to be a particular way doesn't mean the desire is really desiring the thing that it's desiring. There's distortions in our fallenness of how to read those natural desires. And so it's similar. We may have a natural desire to retaliate because of an injustice done. But that doesn't mean retaliation is, in the way we're thinking about it, is what that legitimate desire is really there for. And so it is retraining, catechizing those kinds of dispositions so that they order themselves. That's why the commandments are there, towards the right exercise of those naturally growing up appetites and passions that we have. Well, passion's a part of the fall, so it has the capacity to distort it. But yeah, these things, just because you have a feeling that feels immediate doesn't make it, i.e., God or truth.
Or healthy, or in the interest of society, or in the interest of your family, or even in your own interests. In other words,
it has
all this
no
stuff,
authority.
It doesn't have any authority. And so what we need to point people to are, their responsibilities, point people to their duties, to their oaths. This is what we should be pointing out to these people who are celebrating the death of another human being, is say, you took an oath, didn't you?
Yeah.
What about that oath?
That's
is it just canceled because you don't feel like it anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things I've also been arguing with respect to politicians. I would really like journalists, when somebody says so-and-so is a Nazi, to call them out on it, to say, all right, what do you mean by a Nazi? What makes them a Nazi? Are they creating concentration camps and committing genocide? What do you mean?
Yeah, are they a member of the National Socialist Party?
Yeah, well,
that's literally what it means.
And they never have it right. I mean, half of my dissertation was studying them and the Christian response to it. And these people would not have been on the Christian side of resisting. The people that are labeling everyone that. They would have been the first. They would have been the foot soldiers. They are, as a matter of fact, for their ideology, their brand.
Well, this is an interesting thing. I remember I read years ago a book entitled "Dedication and Leadership" by a guy who was a former communist, and he noted that when it came to recruiting for the Communist Party, disillusioned Nazis were some of the most easily recruited people out there. In other words, what you're dealing with here is a deep longing for belonging and significance.
Yeah.
Right? You're not actually dealing with genuine commitment to a particular set of things. You're actually there are a whole other set of things that are going on. But that was, kind of getting to your point, Tom, they would have been foot soldiers. Yeah. People who are easily swept up in some kind of ideological sort of, program. It could be this, it could be that, it could be anything.
And hurt young people that have had a lot, even if they come from a home that's been together, doesn't mean they come from a society that has it together. And so that they are easy targets. This is why the universities do the indoctrination they do so quickly, because they know they're broken, hurt people, and they sound like they're being a safe haven, a safe space in which those people can explore the things, push the bound, continue the play of childhood without having to bump up against reality and have to mature. And so it creates the pure cocktail for manipulation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, anything else you want to kind of throw in here before we wrap up, Tom? This has been really
Yeah, it's been.
important
It's like I
talk.
said, it was something that came to mind. I've already been working in the area of kind of bioethics and medicine, technology and medicine, and this was one of the things that I thought really stood out as not as disturbing, but one of the disturbing byproducts of an already disturbing event, and
Yeah, yeah,
it was an eye opener.
yeah, yeah. Anything you want to say, Glenn, as we wrap up?
No, I think I've probably said too much already.
Well, anyway, we do want our regular listeners to know that we're looking forward to having Jonathan Bajot on the show. So Symbolic World and all that, people might be familiar with him. Glenn and I are going to be with him at Touchstone, but he's already agreed to come on Pugcast. So we're going to be interviewing him in October. So something to look forward to, folks out there in Pugcast land. And if you like what we do and you want to support it, that would be really appreciated. I had somebody come to me the other day and mention that he was a regular supporter, and I just thanked him. And I thought, man, we need more people like you. So why don't you join that noble band of intrepid supporters who, on a monthly basis, help us pay the bills. And if you'd like to learn how to do that, there's a link in the show notes to our Patreon page. All right, thanks a lot, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Battleground, Washington. The Theology Pugcast is produced and edited by Wiley Craft Productions of Nashville, Tennessee.